Good afternoon and welcome to today's Compliance Week webcast. I'm Joe McCafferty, Executive Editor of Compliance Week, and I'll be hosting today's webcast. This afternoon we're going to be talking about the impact of the new LEDES GRC billing codes. Before we hear from our guests, let me go over the agenda for this afternoon. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. I'll give a brief introduction, then we'll jump into the presentation brought to you today along with DataCert. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. Your questions will be confidential, so don't be shy. They're very important to us, so ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen. I'll pose them to our guests at the end of the presentation. This webcast will also offer CPE credit for attendees. Please disable any pop-up blockers you have in order to access the exam. To obtain your CPE credit, wait until the webcast is over and I sign off. At that point, the final exam will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have any trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, just send an email to info@complianceweek.com. That's info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, you can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. I encourage you to do that. You can hit the View Slide Full Screen button that's at the bottom of your screen to increase the size of your slides. Lastly, there's a Help button located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Today's webcast is part of a series that Compliance Week launched a few years ago. We hold these webcasts just about every week, usually on Thursday afternoons, and our guests have been Chief Compliance and Governance Officers at leading public companies and experts on various compliance, regulatory, governance, and risk topics. I'm not going to read the upcoming schedule, but you can visit www.complianceweek.com for details or to register. Also, a quick word here, don't miss the deadline for registering for Compliance Week's annual conference. We're holding that on May 19th to 21st in Washington, D.C. We have a wonderful agenda for that. The early bird deadline also for lower pricing that expires tomorrow on January 31st. So if you're interested in that, please do check that out. So let's begin our program. Today we're very pleased to have with us Michael Rasmussen. He's an OSEG Fellow and Chief GRC Pundit at GRC 2020 Research. Michael's an internationally recognized pundit on governance, risk management, and compliance with specific expertise on the topics of corporate governance, business ethics, policy management, and corporate culture. Michael is sometimes noted as the father of GRC since he's the first to define and model the GRC market, which he did in 2002 while at Forrester. We're also happy to have with us Kelly Ray. Kelly is an OSEG Fellow and a GRC Solution Strategist at Tata Consultancy Services. Kelly has over 20 years of experience advising companies on establishing and maturing effective legal and compliance programs. She has served as an integral team member in developing PwC's integrated governance, risk, and compliance service offering, and has been an author of industry-led consensus-based practices and other guidance on GRC with OSEG. Kelly also chairs the LEDES Oversight Committee's GRC subcommittee and serves on OSEG's policy management and GRC XML working groups. And last, certainly not least, we have Daniel Dewan. He is Director of Product Management GRC for DataCert. Daniel manages DataCert's Passport GRC product offering and aligns DataCert's product roadmap, partner strategy, and channel development to the risks and challenges posed by an ever-changing regulatory landscape. He serves on the OSEG Policy Management Working Group and the LEDES GRC subcommittee. All right, moving on. I'd like to welcome all our guests here on behalf of DataCert, our partner for today's session. This webinar is part of a DataCert Meet the Expert series, presenting the latest thought leadership from knowledgeable risk and compliance professionals, seasoned legal experts, and other leaders in the field. Let's walk through what we're going to cover today. Discussion topics for today include realizing the value of GRD, the OSEG capability model. We're also going to talk about understanding the total cost of GRC, involving the LEDES GRC initiative. And we're also going to talk about enabling technology. In a second here, we're going to have Michael Rasmussen get things started. Before we do that, we'd like to do a polling question just to gauge where some of you are on this. So the first question, and in a second there's going to be a poll pop up, and we'd like you to answer those questions. And the first one is, how do you measure the value of GRC activities in your company? Go through the choices here. Qualitative assessment, quantitative metrics. You use a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures. You have no process in place, or you don't know. So while you take a second to make your selections here, we're going to have Michael come on and get us started here. Michael, it's all yours.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today and interact with everybody on this very important topic of GRC, specifically from a legal context. So as we talk about LEDES and all the great work they're doing, you know, the role of legal and the general counsel in GRC programs is a growing role that I'm finding that organizations are having a lot of interest in. So my role in my portion of this presentation is to set the stage on GRC. So I will relate things to legal, but in general I'm going to be introducing what GRC is about and the OSEC GRC capability model, and we'll get further into it in other panelists coming up after me. So the question before you is, what's more important to you? Well, what's going to have the best strategy to you? Risk management and compliance. The organization does GRC. It doesn't matter if you call it GRC, XYZ, ABC, you know, the acronym itself. The point is that every organization has some approach to risk management and compliance in their organization. It is just part of doing business. And so organizations are actively involved in managing risk and compliance, and it might be rather ad hoc, fly by the seat of our pants approach, to very defined and disciplined approaches. But the question isn't, you know, do we do GRC or not? The truth is you do GRC, whether you call it GRC or something else. So in doing GRC, an immature approach was one that's reactive. You know, you're responding to incidents and investigations and issues. There's the finger pointing. You know, you're probably dealing with things in a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. Where a proactive approach is you're actively monitoring the relationships of risks and compliance and controls, including the legal risks out there. You're trying to establish compliance and integrity for the business, providing regular assurance and due diligence and ongoing risk assessments in light of business objectives. So a mature approach is a proactive approach, while an immature approach is a reactive approach. At the end of the day, we want to enable smart decisions, managing resources, lowering our exposure to risk and the costs of managing risk and controls, being able to integrate silos, not consolidate silos. We're not talking about you know, creating a chief GRC officer that everybody points into. That's not what we're talking about. There's proper checks and balances between these roles, and it's about integrating these roles, getting them to collaborate and share information. So then we have optimized capital allocation, managing workflow and tasks, and removing a lot of redundancy we see in a lot of organizations. So next slide, please. So this is the OSEC GRC capability model, and I just talked a lot about some of the outcomes, but you know, here's some of those same outcomes worded a little bit differently. But you know, the OSEC GRC capability model has 8 main components, and we'll talk about those components in the next slide. But the overall objective right now is the outcomes of a mature approach to governance, risk management, and compliance is to really achieve business objectives and to define and enhance the organizational culture of the organization, to have greater credibility with stakeholders and integrity of the organization where there's increased confidence. We want to be able to prepare and protect the organization while reducing the adversity and loss and exposure of the organization. We want to be able to motivate and inspire desired conduct. This is the right way for things to work in the organization and really optimize the organization itself. Let's get into all these in more detail. So again, these are the 8 components of the OSEC GRC capability model. It all starts with context. And context includes external context of around the business. This could be the regulatory environment bearing down upon the organization, the legal environment and legal risks and bearing down outside on the organization. It can be the risk environment of economic risks. It can be the competitive environment that the organization's in, geopolitical, a lot of different pieces to it. That's the external environment, that external context. Internal context is your internal people, processes, and resources. Both are very important. A lot of times when we manage controls in the organizations, we focus a lot on that internal context. But it's that external environment that is bearing down on the organization that really, impacts and leads to a significant exposure upon the organization. So when we look at context, we need to look internally to the organization, but also externally. Context also involves the culture of the organization. This includes your ethical culture, your culture of risk-taking, your workforce culture, your governance culture. Context also involves the objectives. Where is the business headed, and how are we going to get there? From context, the GRC capability model moves into organize, where we get commitment, where there's some type of executive board-level commitment to a GRC program and oversight. We have different roles and responsibilities. Some of those roles are corporate compliance and ethics, risk management, finance, audit, IT, health and safety, quality. But a very important role is legal and the general counsel. And what are the roles and responsibilities for the different parts of the GRC program? Particularly today, we'll talk about what's the role of legal in the GRC program. And then what's the accountability structures? And with that, proper checks and balances. Should compliance report into legal or should it report outside of legal? We hear often that legal's got the duty to protect and deny, while compliance has got the duty to discover and fix. And can those be at odds with each other? So what's the proper levels of accountability and sharing that accountability and providing independent and objective assurance? What's the role of audit? Then we move into the assess, where we identify, analyze, and plan for risk. What are the risks that the organization face? How do we analyze those risks and how do we treat them? We can also, in the same context, identify compliance obligations, analyze how we're going to comply, and, execute on that, the planning. And then the same thing with business objectives, because all these things relate, where we've got the business performance and objectives, the risk to hitting those objectives, as well as the execution on that, and ongoing compliance obligations. From there, the OSEC GRC capability model moves into the PROACT component, where we have proactive controls like policies and training and incentives, stakeholder relations. We move into the detect component, where we have detective controls for monitoring, looking for where there are issues or gaps in controls. We have notification pathways through hotlines. We do inquiries through surveys and self-assessments. Then we move into the respond component, where we have responsive actions and controls. This is dealing with investigations and incidents and issues, crisis response and remediations, and how we reward good behavior, particularly things like whistleblowers. And then we move into the measure component, where we ongoing measure the context that we started with. Remember, we started with external and internal context as well as culture and objectives. Well, that context is constantly changing. We need to monitor the changing context of the business to see how GRC needs to change as a result. And we're monitoring the performance of GRC and focusing on improvement and providing assurance, particularly through audit, that things are working as expected. And at the core of everything is the interact component. And this is the information and reporting and technology type heart of GRC that makes it efficient. As I mentioned, every organization does GRC. And so that interact component for some is built on documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and it ends up with things slipping through the cracks, a lot of redundancy, and a lot of overhead. I know of companies I've talked to that said 80% of their GRC resources are document reconcilers, trying to gather information from hundreds or thousands of documents, emails, and spreadsheets and try to build reports out of it. That's that interact component, at an immature level. At a more mature level, we have an integrated information technology architecture with strong workflow and process management. Next slide, please. Now, in order for GRC to work, it involves getting several roles to the table and to talk to each other. They include compliance roles, risk, finance, audit, IT, the line of business and business operations, but it also includes legal, the general counsel's office. It's a critical role in GRC that I'm seeing the last year to 2 years is starting to grow in more prominence at the GRC strategy table. That legal's got a lot to contribute and lead in that area. What's really important about this particular graphic is that at that table, you've got two boards there, GRC information and corporate information. You know, we're not just managing risk and compliance type topics in the context of risk and compliance, we're managing the context of corporate information, corporate objectives and strategy. So GRC needs to be aligned with the business. Next slide, please. In order for GRC to really work structurally and be successful, it requires that we have some type of information architecture. Again, an immature GRC approach might have, scattered documents and spreadsheets, while more mature GRC is one that has a solid information and technology architecture that integrates all this data for easy reporting and analysis. And this is key to as we explore the LEDES program in just a few minutes. Beyond that, on the next slide, the ultimate values of GRC is the ability to be more efficient in my human and financial capital resources. How can I be more efficient with the resources I have for GRC, to do more with less? The second angle is the effectiveness. How can we be more effective at managing and monitoring our legal risks and requirements, our compliance risks and requirements, our ethical culture and values and code of conduct? And agile. In the context of a changing business environment, how do we keep the business current and out of trouble? What's our agility? And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our next panelist as we explore, I have one more slide, I forgot. The benefits of GRC is going to be the higher quality of information, optimizing our processes, being better to allocate our capital, improve effectiveness, and the reputation and brand of the organization ultimately reduce costs. That's GRC in a nutshell. It's probably one of the quickest times I've ever had to go through and define, the components of GRC. But I set the stage, and we'll turn it over to the next stage of our presentation now.
Great.
Kelly?
Thank you. Just a second here, Michael. We're going to do another polling question, but that was Michael Rasmussen. Thank you very much, Michael, for a very good look here at GRC and a fantastic overview. We're going to hear from Kelly Ray of Data Consultant Services in a second. Before we do, we have another question here that I'd like to walk through. Which of the following types of external costs, including fees and software or other expenses, does your organization allocate to a compliance cost center? Check all that apply. And our options are laws and regulations monitoring, legal and compliance risk assessment, lobbying and government affairs, regulatory filings, regulatory investigations, third-party investigations, supply chain partner audits, litigation defense, fines, penalties, settlements, civil damages, and J, training programs. I'm going to take a few seconds here to fill that out, and while you're doing that, we're going to have Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, do we have the polling results from the first poll?
Sure, if we covered that. Why don't we come back to that?
Okay, well, moving on. Thanks, Michael, for the introduction on GRC. As Mike showed in one of the slides, there are a lot of players internally within any organization that are part of the GRC mix. And each of those internal players are likely, at some point or other, to use outside providers, either as consultants, as lawyers, training developers, a whole slew of different types of services related to governance, risk, and compliance that are provided externally. And in trying to understand what the total cost of GRC is, you need to have an understanding of both your internal and external spend. So moving into GRC, having come from the legal background, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to say, the legal industry has already kind of tackled this issue, and how do they get information about their spend. And this could be applied to not just outside law firms, but other GRC service providers. And as we look here about the types of things that are specifically on the top of mind for chief legal officers, you're going to see that a whole lot of them, virtually all of them, involve obtaining outside advice, outside services, which necessarily results in receiving invoices from those providers. So when they receive an invoice, let's talk about the standards that are in place to help them understand what that invoice is communicating to them. Back in the 90s, there was a group that came together to try to tackle the process of learning more information from the invoices they received from their outside service providers, and that was in the legal arena. And so this group, called the Legal Electronic Data Exchange Standard Oversight Committee, or LEDES for short, came together and worked out two different things. They worked out a format, basically a spreadsheet format at that point in time, which allowed the outside service provider to deliver an electronic spreadsheet that captured all their fees and expenses in a standardized format that could be consumed by the corporation's technology systems in order for the in-house counsel to be able to analyze the information. But to make it meaningful, getting it electronically just is a matter of timing. But to make it meaningful, to make the ability to build in rules and say, hey, I don't want to be paying for these types of charges. You ought to be sourcing this differently. All those kinds of critical analytical thoughts around how to manage your spend, that doesn't really easily come into play unless the people who are providing you with the information about their services are doing it in a consistent way. So the second thing that they put together was the Uniform Task-Based Management System. And the concept here is that there is a set of codes by which you would classify services and fees. Initially, they started off by launching litigation codes because that was the top area of spend. Then that grew to bankruptcy codes, intellectual property in form of patent codes, trademark codes, transactional codes for like mergers and acquisitions kind of work, and then just a general set of consulting codes, kind of as a catch-all for things that didn't fall into one of the other sets. Well, recently, there's been a focus on, can we build out some more codes in the unique areas that we know are high cost? So year before last, they worked on putting together the electronic discovery code set so that people could get a better handle on managing their spend around electronic discovery. And then this last year, we launched the effort of creating the GRC code set. Beyond that, there's two others that are in process. One is knowledge management, and the other one, which is taking this kind of capability to a next step, is the intellectual property group is looking at putting together a set of methods for capturing information around patent disclosures and going beyond just transmitting electronically billing information, invoice and cost information, but to other substantive information where you may need to communicate from inside to your outside provider for your patent disclosure. So understanding how the codes themselves work is not too tricky if you understand that there's really a combination of things that go into building out the codes. For the GRC code set, we've taken the OSEG GRC capability model and mapped it straight in to what the phases and tasks of activities would be. But for your service provider, they're doing specific activities like researching something. Well, the UTBMS codes work by combining a specific activity code, like researching, with the task code. So if I am monitoring the regulatory environment, I would use the task code for external context and monitoring, and I combine that with the specific thing that I'm doing. So then those two pieces of information paired together get into your invoice, and that gets communicated. Similarly on spend, if I am incurring duplication charges because I'm submitting a regulatory comment filing, that gets combined to show that I'm doing regulatory interaction with copy charges. So at a high level, that's really all it is. Let's move on to why did we think this was important. Well, there have been a lot of benefits that have been achieved by using the code sets within the legal department for legal spend. Key among those is the amount of information that can now be communicated about what your service providers are doing to be able to help you understand in depth the cost that you have, and then with the knowledge of how you're spending the information, how to optimize that. Then you've also got the ability to compare cost effectiveness of different providers for the same types of services, compare how your spend for one type of activity, say training, compares to your hotline expense for tracking violations of that same topic. And then you've got the ability to predict. If I have a tight understanding of what's it cost me to make changes to my environment, then I can start to predict what the cost of legislative and regulatory changes would be going forward in order to say in my regulatory comment, no, we suggest that you make this rule change, not that rule change, because it will have a lower negative impact on the industry. It also allows you to use existing tool sets out there being used by legal departments all around the globe to be able to track your GRC initiatives and already absorb this spend information for processing, which you guys answered that legal and compliance risk assessment is the primary area where you're allocating out your spend specifically to a compliance cost center. And then lastly, we want to be in a position to promulgate these code sets to other tools that are used on an enterprise level by other parts of the business, risk tools, audit tools, other places that can benefit from the understanding that are distributed across the enterprise. So specifically, the GRC subcommittee took the OSEG model and one for one created a set of codes. In the OSEG model, there is an element called GC 2.1, which refers to defining the internal context. The G on there simply says, hey, this is the governance, risk, and compliance code set. The C says we're looking at the context part of the GRC capability model. And 201 is the equivalent of saying 2.1 in the OSEG model. Now, historically, LEDES codes have always been represented by a single one or two alphabetics that simply say this is the code set you're working with, and then a series of 3 digits. So for those who are more comfortable using that standard, that classical representation, we've published the codes with that form as well. And it's a matter of which are you more comfortable with, and also if you have existing technology that already handles LEDES codes, there are some technology providers that do not yet have the flexibility to report on the 201, something beyond 2 digits for the tax code. So let me show you the example. So here we're going to go down to GC201, define the internal context. The description as it's provided in the GRC capability model is that this is identifying the key structures and assets that define the internal context. One of those structures is going to be how you organize your legal entities. So in the GRC code set, we've included an explanatory note so that people know how their particular services fit in to the code set. So all creation of new legal entities would fall into this one singular code, GC201, but the activities and the expenses you incur in relation to that would be also tracked by the combination of this code with the activity or expense code. Similarly, for changes to the environment, if you're making resolutions to change boards, officers, directors, all that falls into a single code of GC202. So while overall, when you look at the entire GRC capability model, there's a lot of elements in there, and it may appear at first blush to be daunting because there are so many. The services that are provided tend to clump together in discrete pieces, so the amount of codes that you use tend to be minimal. And part of the reasons for putting this into place is to also benefit the service providers, because we're just now coming into the benefits in the legal community of having years' worth of historical data about legal spend and letting the service providers, the law firms, be able to see, hey, how does what I'm charging and how I'm staffing my services, how does that compare to my competitors? How can I improve upon my bottom line based upon staffing decisions and the ability to recoup those costs from clients? So there's a lot of information that benefits the service providers when they will issue their invoices using these types of codes. We've already touched upon it, but the consumers of GRC services, they're going to have the opportunity to understand the right mix of internal and external sourcing, the impacts of changing requirements, and trying to implement ROI optimized strategies. And ultimately, the regulators will be in a position when the corporations are ready to provide it, to be able to provide the regulators with information about what are the market implications of the changes that they want to make. And it gives us a next level of being able to deploy data-driven rulemaking and try to rationalize some of the things that will be happening as rules continue to change. So how do you get started with this? Well, fortunately, the activity and expense codes, those are already done. The GRC codes, as you've seen, are mapped directly to the OSET capability model, so those are already done. So the next steps for the subcommittee are to issue out an implementation guide. That's predominantly focused on people who are unfamiliar with LEDES, unfamiliar with using the code sets already. Law firms, they've already been issuing invoices this way. They've got their technology in place to do it. In-house counsel, by and large, have technology in place to absorb this information and be able to do line item modifications. What's missing is that we're expanding this into other types of providers and into other types of people within the corporate space, chief risk officers, chief audit officers. And so for them, this implementation guide is really going down to a complete level set. We're going to be issuing out subsets for specific services so that it doesn't appear as daunting. Specifically, like I just gave you the example that the code sets for corporate secretaries and those providing legal entity management services, there's just 2 codes, and they don't need to be worried about all the others. So that's just a way to make it more digestible. And then the next steps for us is to review the timekeeper attributes, which is another set of codes and parameters. Because we're expanding the type of timekeepers that are now able to invoice electronically, we need to update those attributes so that we capture them properly. And this is giving us information like how long has this person been in practice, what's their role and status, so that there's an ability to begin to compare costs across different providers. And then, of course, we'll have to keep it aligned to the subsequent releases of the GRC capability model. Related to this effort is work I'm doing on the GRC XML working group, and that is focused around how do you associate specific costs to specific risks and controls, and therefore are able to aggregate them together and properly report them and get a full comprehensive business understanding of where your spend is across different discrete projects and activities. So that is a key technology issue, and I am going to hand it off to let Daniel talk about enabling technology.
Thank you so much, Kelly. In a minute, we're going to be hearing from Daniel Dewan, Director of Product Management GRC for DataCert. He's going to be talking about technology to help companies reap the benefits of the LEDES GRC initiative. Before we hear from Daniel, let's go to our final polling question of the afternoon here. We can move to that. And the question is the legal e-billing/spend management software that your company uses integrated with your GRC management tools? And the possible answers here are A, yes, these software tools are integrated. B, no, these software tools are not integrated. C, no, our company doesn't use legal e-billing spend management software. D, no, our company doesn't use GRC management tools. E, our company doesn't use either of these kinds of software tools. And F, I don't know. If you could just take a few minutes here to select the answer that most closely aligns with your experience. And while you're doing that, we're going to hear from Daniel. So I'll turn it over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, Kelly and Michael. So to derive value from the LEDES GRC code set, there are really 2 important technologies that need to be considered. So the first of these is a legal matter and spend management system, and the second is a platform-based GRC management system. So as Kelly pointed out, UTBMS codes were first created to address the legal arena, and legal e-billing systems today already support the LEDES standard format for invoicing and enable electronic capture of the codes. A good matter and spend management system is able to use that coded data to provide reports that support effective measurement and analysis for corporate legal departments today. So with the introduction of the GRC codes, we anticipate two major changes. The first of these will be more accurate classification of the work that outside counsel perform for GRC functions. And the second, as Kelly mentioned, is an expansion of the network of service providers that use the legal e-billing system to submit invoices. So for example, external investigation firms, due diligence services, risk assessment services, and so on. As for the GRC platform, this is going to enable not only the sort of integration of GRC-related projects that Michael often talks about, so things like being able to bring together your efforts around regulatory change management, policy management, risk management, audit, case management, all these kinds of activities, but also the integration of spend management as it relates to those activities, and that's both for internal and external spend capture. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, really the key benefit that we're looking for from technology is greater visibility into GRC-related cost. Automation enabled by technology provides consistent data on activities and spending related to GRC, and the more consistent that data, the better the reporting. So this leads to specific benefits like having granular historical data that you can analyze according to the criteria that's most meaningful to you, the ability to compare the cost of compliance against the cost of non-compliance, details on internal versus external costs to help with sourcing decisions for different kinds of GRC-related work, data to inform assessments of your various service providers' performance to be able to compare them based on scorecarding and make decisions about who is most appropriate to engage for what. Additionally, with more accurate and granular accounting of historical costs, you have better information to use in budgeting for GRC requirements and better basis for analyzing ROI around GRC-related activities. And then finally, all this helps to justify requests for funding for new GRC initiatives. Let's have a quick look here at the survey. So it looks like the majority of you answered that you don't know. Second to that, we have company doesn't use either of these software tools, so neither spend management nor a GRC platform. So it sounds like among our audience there is lots of opportunity for driving towards some of these benefits that we'll see from the new GRC codes. All right, let's see. Returning to our slides, so the additional benefits, this is in addition to the increased visibility that we talked about on the last slide. So in addition to that increased visibility, technology will also be able to provide more efficient handling of service provider invoices once they're in that electronic format. So the most obvious way that we can enable this through technology is through automated invoice validation. So this is using business rules engines to audit invoices that come in against your corporate billing guidelines. So things like being able to detect whether a timekeeper's fee or a photocopy rate is above what you've negotiated with your external service providers. These sort of audit engines can also detect things that are particularly difficult for a human invoice reviewer to detect, so things like a duplicate line item that appears on two separate invoices across different billing periods. Additionally, professional staff can they change their whole approach to invoice review by making it more exception-based instead of really looking at all the content of an invoice exhaustively. And then finally, a benefit to the service providers is that electronic invoicing often results in faster turnaround on payments. In this next slide here, we have an example of one report that you might run making use of the LEDES GRC codes. So in this example, in addition to data that's been gathered from external service providers through electronic invoices, we also have data from internal staff timekeeping for folks who have been involved in investigations internally and coded their activities using these UTBMS codes or the LEDES GRC codes. And so in the end, we have a view of the organization's internal versus external spend on investigations broken out by issue type. In this next example here, we're able to see the summary of internal versus external GRC spend on an anti-corruption GRC program as it breaks down across the various components of the OSEG capability model. So this particular report provides visibility into the cost of proactive GRC measures, like we can see here, prevention and detection, versus reactive measures like responding to incidents and investigations. Gives a good idea of how spend is broken out across proactive versus reactive and what the influences are between those two. Next slide, please. So a real-world example from the legal arena might help to clarify some of these potential benefits around the LEDES code set and how having technology can help you take advantage of it. So MMC, or Marsh & McLennan Companies, one of the world's largest professional services, risk management, and insurance brokerage firms, implemented enterprise legal technology to manage key litigation and global insurance risks. The solution provides a number of tangible, measurable benefits, which were highlighted in the GRC 2020 Value Award that MMC received. So to just kind of itemize some of these benefits here, from 2008 to 2012, partly via data search technology, MMC's legal department reduced its outside counsel fees by 56%, which represented its lowest spend since 2007. MMC estimates it saved an additional $10 million in July of 2011, aligned to mandatory discounts, 2010 rates, fixed fee pricing, and competitive bidding, all of which were either enabled directly through the Passport platform technology or by leveraging comparative analytics that came out of that platform in its negotiation with its external service providers, with MMC's external service providers. MMC has also determined that evaluating total legal expenses as a percentage of revenue is key when maintaining a global legal department, and its goal in this area is to maintain its total legal spend at less than 1% of revenue, which it is able to do using data search Passport technology. Moving along here, improved reporting and dashboard capabilities provide a more detailed global view of a spend by line of business, by region, by law firm, by matter. And with Passport, MMC is able to generate better and richer reports than it could previously, reducing the time spent running these reports by as much as 25%. And finally, by utilizing preferred providers tracked and managed in Passport, MMC's lawyers can select the firm best positioned for a particular matter while building long-term relationships and allowing MMC to reduce its preferred provider list from 150 to 50 firms, which of course significantly lowers its legal ops costs. So wrapping up here with some specific technology considerations. To get the greatest benefit from employing the LEDES GRC codes, there are important things to consider when evaluating the specific technology solution. So first, it's critical that there be seamless information flow between your legal and GRC management solutions. The best way to ensure that is to have a shared technology platform providing common database, document management, reporting, and particularly rules engines across these functional areas. Additionally, if you are operating globally, the solution should provide full support for compliance with EU VAT directives, as well as multi-currency capabilities that enable e-billing on a global scale, and compliance with varied and complex tax and regulatory requirements. Obviously, the solution needs to provide full support for the LEDES format and particularly the new LEDES GRC code set. The solution should include a secure pipeline for the exchange of any type of information, whether it's financial or direct project involvement from those external service providers, free of any of the risks that are posed by traditional ASP model solutions where external providers have direct access to your internal system. And then in addition to the capabilities of the technology solution, the solution vendor should also have a couple of core competencies. One of those being a dedicated support team that can assist the service providers directly with training and questions regarding proper use of the UTBMS and LEDES GRC formats. And then also staff with experience in the LEDES GRC format itself and in effectively supporting global implementations. So with that, Joe, I'll turn it back to you to talk about additional resources.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. We have some additional resources here for you. If you download the slides, and again, you can do that by using the drop-down menu that's on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you download the slides, you can get these live links, which will take you through to some additional resources that we think will be very helpful as you move through this topic. And with that, we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to take some of your questions. Let's move to our first question here. Just having difficulty accessing the questions here. All right. So I'm going to direct this question to Michael, a question we have here from our audience. If we want to move to a more proactive approach to GRC with integrated information across functions, where's the best place to start?
So if we're just going to start a program towards an integrated GRC, where's the best place to start? Yeah. That was the question? Mm-hmm. Really, it's getting a good picture of what we're up against now. And in order to understand GRC, we need to be able to go out and understand, what is the organization doing currently? Because from my perspective, as I mentioned, every organization is already doing GRC. The question is, how do we mature it? And so what's happening now? Is it in scattered silos? What are those different silos? What's the level of redundancy? So, let's look at audit and legal and quality and health and safety and security and compliance and ethics and finance in these different areas. And often it's by sending a survey out to those different functions and understanding what they're doing, what level of redundancy is out there, and how can we start optimizing and improving things. A lot of times we'll find out that we've got 100 different assessment formats being used in different Word or Excel or maybe Survey Gizmo or Monkey sending out surveys and assessments. There might be 20 different policy portals in the environment with different templates for policies, and you'll find that you often have a mess. And from there, as you find out the as-is state, you can start planning the to-be state and getting people on board. Well, what is really critical on that first stage is finding out who's willing to work with you on a GRC strategy to improve GRC within the organization today, because some parts of the organization might want to hold back and they might not want to cooperate. And to me, a key part of GRC success is knowing who you can work with and working with them first, and then bringing other people into the fold later.
I see. Michael, I want to stay with you for a second. We have another question here. How is GRC different from the way we typically identify and capture risks in the risk register?
But that's an element of GRC. As I mentioned, every organization does GRC already, and so as we capture risks and put them in the risk register, that's part of a GRC process. So it really no differently, although I would question on the scope. Sometimes people's risk registers, aren't fully baked out, because sometimes we might not be looking at external risks. We might just be looking at internal risks, or maybe our risk register is highly focused on, finance and Sarbanes-Oxley and internal controls over financial reporting, and we haven't really thought about, the manufacturing risk, the supply chain risks, the legal risks, and those aren't adequately represented in our risk register. But risk identification is exactly what that is, part of the GRC process. And again, every organization is doing GRC, and today, it's just how mature is that? And that risk register that for the organizations that are doing that, is it thorough and are you covering all your bases?
I see. Thank you, Michael. Kelly, we have a question here that's very similar to the one a member of the audience asked to Michael on getting started. And the question reads, I can see the value of leveraging the LEDES GRC codes. What's the best way to get started in that endeavor? Kelly, do we have you on the line? You might have your line on mute.
Sorry, I put my mic on mute. Where you get started depends on who you are. If you are a service provider, it could well be that all you're doing is adding this code set to the existing codes that you already are able to issue invoices on. For corporations, where you want to get started is to understand what you want to achieve and how you want to be able to understand your information and which parts you care about tracking and which parts you don't care about tracking. If all you care about tracking is what you're spending with audits, then you just have one part of the organization of the model to look to, and you coordinate with your internal audit folks to discuss how the information is going to come into the organization technologically and how they make that presented to you. If they use a system like DataCert system, that's automatic and it simply gets configured. If you're going to use an existing accounts payable system, and you're going to need to do some tweaks and let your IT department know how it is you want to manage that information and brief them on the code set.
I see. And Kelly, I want to stick with you here for another question that we have. Is this new billing standard effective or mandated? Or is it an emerging and a good practice that will likely gain acceptance, especially with big data?
It's really the latter. All LEDES standards and all UTBMS code sets are best practice things. Nothing is mandated at this point. Although in the UK, the judiciary is mandating that information presented to the court for recovery of, say, electronic discovery fees against the other party, they are going to require a version of the UTBMS codes in that circumstance. It's not required, but as we are able to feed this information in through the corporation and out through the regulatory reporting, it's going to make that easier. It's going to make the aggregation of that information and the ability to report on it easier. By the same token, you don't have to have your organization structured according to the OSEG GRC capability model. In fact, the GRC capability model from OSEG isn't meant to be a structure. It's meant to say, does my organization do these different things? So you can use the code set with your outside providers, or if you decide to do a time and motion study, you could use this as the context for that. For internal costs, you can use it in ways that you think will be advantageous to you. You aren't required to be fully aligned at all with the OSEG GRC capability model in order to use the code set.
We're running out of time here, but I think we have time for one last question. Daniel, I'm going to direct this one to you. Can we get the integrated view of GRC and legal spending that you describe if we're using technology from different vendors?
Okay. I assume that's different vendors for the matter and spend management side versus the GRC platform side. It's certainly possible to marry data between two systems, but it's not the ideal solution. The integration between two systems is going to inherently be a much lighter integration than having the two solutions on the same common platform. So having just a strict data exchange between the spend management system and GRC is not going to be nearly as valuable as having shared process. So being able to do things like those invoice validation rules and having workflow around invoice review, which really is going to be much easier to attain with a common platform. And then, as is always the case with integration, it's more costly and complex to maintain over time. So as you're making upgrades and changes to either system on either side of that integration, the integration itself often has to be reviewed and updated to keep up with those changes. Whereas if you've got the common platform, that's not a concern.
I see. Well, I think we're out of time, but I want to thank all of you for a really informative session here. You've given us a lot to think about. Again, everyone, our guests were Michael Rasmussen. He's an OSEG Fellow and Chief GRC Pundit at GRC 2020 Research. We heard from Kelly Ray, an OSEG Fellow and GRC Solution Strategist at Tata Consultancy Services. And we had Daniel Dewan, Director of Product Management GRC with DataCert. And also a special thanks today to DataCert for help making this webcast possible. Also, the webcast has been recorded. It'll be available sometime on our site in the next few hours. CPE credit is now available to subscribers of Compliance Week for our archive webcast. So please do check out our on-demand CPE library, and you can find that under the webcast tab on our website, www.complianceweek.com. A couple quick notes here, again, to obtain your CPE credit after the presentation. Wait until I finish this brief wrap-up, and the webcast will close automatically, and the final exam will be presented in a separate window. Just a reminder to please do disable your pop-up blockers that could interfere with the exam. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate for any reason, just send an email to info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. This concludes our webcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and have a great day. Thank you.